Mary Crow Dog was a Sioux Native American woman born on September 26, 1954, in the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. Mary wrote her novel to recount her life experiences, the civil rights movement she was a part of, and of her personal and spiritual journey as a woman in these times. In 1971, Mary visited the home of influential medicine man Leonard Crow Dog to attend a powwow meeting. Even though Mary was already pregnant with her first child, Leonard would become her future husband. Mary vowed to be involved in the protest and pleas for better treatment of Native Americans. Mary and other women were not afraid to stand with their men and give their lives for the cause. Mary ended up giving birth at the 71-day siege of Wounded Knee. After the siege was over, Leonard Crow Dog was arrested and transferred to many different prisons across the country. Eventually, letters, petitions, and rallies called for the release of Crow Dog, and after 2 years, he was free. At the celebratory welcome home event for Leonard Crow Dog, Mary was honored by tribesmen who fastened an eagle plume in her hair and gave her a new name, Ohitika, brave woman.
In the book Lakota Women by Mary Crow Dog, we learn about the horrible acts committed against the Indian people. In Chapter 2, we learn of a woman known to their community as the Turtle Woman. They speak about her kindness, fearlessness, and how she was greatly respected in the community. Mary then talks about the woman's death. In the summer of 1976, she was found beaten to death in her home. Although this is disturbing, she goes on to mention how the woman's death was never investigated. She references the life of the Indian multiple times in the book. The life of an Indian is not held in great value in the state of South Dakota, and the good Indians die first. Although we think that atrocities like this could only be possible in the past, that is wrong. In recent years, many Indigenous people in the United States and Canada have been murdered or have gone missing. In recent years, the creation of the MMIW and MMIP, Missing and Murdered Indigenous People and Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women movement, has brought to light the issues facing Indigenous communities. The symbol for these movements are a red handprint over the mouth. This represents all the missing women whose voices are not heard, the silence by the media on these cases, and the lack of urgency by law enforcement during this crisis. Murder is the third leading cause of death among Indigenous women, and this risk is 10 times higher for women living on reservations. The issue does not just affect grown adult women, but young girls as well, with the youngest victim being less than 1 year old and the oldest victim being 83 years old. These are people's babies and great-grandmothers. The Savannah Act and the Not Invisible Act were put in place in 2019 and 2020 in order to bring light to cases of MMIW and ensure proper documentation of these cases. Another issue we see in the book is Native American boarding schools. Mary Crow Dog brings us in on the first-hand experience faced by children that were sent to the boarding schools. She even goes as far as to describe the transportation to the boarding schools as kidnapping and compare the actions of the teachers and the punishments the children face to that of Nazi concentration camps. She also mentions how children were dumped into these boarding schools like a small creature from another world, and would try their best to survive, and some would not survive at all. The shock of the children entering the boarding schools was so extreme, some children would feel as though the only way out was suicide. The outcome of the boarding schools, Dog described the children as caricatures of white people. The boys had their hair cut and slicked back in collared shirts, thick jackets, and leather shoes, and the girls in white blouses and button boots, along with the years of taking away their culture and language, made them only look like the white people expected them to. They would then realize that the white people did not want them because they were still Indians, and the Indians did not want them because they lost their Indian culture, beliefs, and language. The Indian boarding school policy was intended to implement cultural genocide through removal and reprogramming of Indigenous children. Their main policy being kill the Indian and save the man. Although they intended to save the man, many of the children never returned home to their families, nor have they all been accounted for by the U.S. government. There are still 125 schools open a day that are considered Indian boarding schools.
The memoir Lakota Woman by Mary Crow Dog tells a poignant and enlightening story about growing up as a Native American woman in a time of social inequity. Mary Lakota's Sioux experience provides a unique lens through which she explores issues of race, gender, class, sexuality, privilege, and discrimination. Lakota Woman relates to the history of inequalities in American society, highlighting their various nature and lasting impact on society. The central topic of Lakota Woman revolves around the systemic prejudice and segregation confronted by Native Americans. The historical abuse of indigenous communities is profoundly imbued within the texture of American history. Mary's account brings to light the battles of her individuals, the Lakota Sioux, who persevered through constrained uprooting, broken settlements, and social concealment. Through her story, readers witness the generational injury delivered upon Native Americans due to systemic prejudice. Mary's encounters are symbolic of the broader history of indigenous peoples groups. Mary's narrative sheds light on the pervasive racism towards Native Americans, both inside their group and in their encounters with the dominant culture. She and her family deal with racial prejudice. The book highlights the institutional racism and misconceptions that have endured throughout American history while addressing the racial injustices experienced by Native Americans. This reverberates with the works of researchers like Ferguson, whose compositions on race and racial disparities highlight the importance of recognizing and tending to the systemic segregation faced by indigenous communities in the United States. Mary's experience highlights the interconnectedness between race and gender. Native American women deal with a special set of issues both in their communities and in society at large. The memoir gives a detailed account of how Mary's life was impacted by gender norms in the Lakota culture as a result of outside influences. In works like McIntosh, White Privilege and Male Privilege, which emphasizes how power and discrimination are not monolithic but rather overlap in complicated ways, the confluence of gender and race is an issue that is studied. Readers who have read Lakota Woman will have a deep grasp of the past and current societal injustices that Native American tribes have to deal with. It is a call to action to rectify these injustices, save indigenous traditions, and carry on the struggle for justice and fairness. The continuing battle for a more just and equal society and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of difficulty are both demonstrated by Mary Crow's Dog's narrative. Mary Crow, Lakota Woman provides an insightful look at the history of social injustices in the U.S., particularly in connection to questions of race, gender, and class, as well as the intersections of these elements. This autobiography offers an engaging story that relates to the more general concerns of privilege, prejudice, and diversity found in scholarly works by authors like Ferguson, McIntosh, Bell, and Bruns. Mary's narrative serves as both a reminder of the ongoing effects of social injustice and an appeal for Americans today to confront these problems with knowledge, compassion, and a dedication to fairness and diversity.